Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Breaking the Glass and Women in Cable Tech webinar on leadership from entry level to the C-suite. Today, we're going to talk about what it means to be a leader, whether you are an individual contributor, you just started at an organization, or if you're up in the C-suite and you're making those big calls day in and day out. Yeah, as we get started, I'd love to just introduce you to Breaking the Glass and a little bit more about what we do as well. So my name's Elizabeth Lamb. I'm the partnerships manager, and over the course of my working at Breaking the Glass, we've had a really great relationship with women in cable tech. I think this might be our 7th or 6th webinar that we've produced with the organization as well. But we are a women's career and D&I initiative founded by Computer Futures. Computer Futures is a contract technical recruitment company that specializes in placing talent in Salesforce, BI, mobile, Adobe, and your various web development languages. We know as recruiters that we have a strong responsibility towards positively impacting the cultures that we help place talent in. So we decided to develop this program to start having these conversations all around women's career development and diversity and inclusion. And it's really gained a big attraction over the years, so much that we've invested in full-time staff to run the program and seek out partnerships with our clients, with various nonprofits, and it's been an amazing journey so far. We've done events with Visa, Charles Schwab, Walmart, Dell, to name a few. All of our programs are personalized based on our partner organizations' goals as well. So if you are interested in getting involved and talking to me about our process, I'd be happy to have a conversation after the event. I'll be dropping some links throughout the event, giving you my contact information, along with ways to get in touch with our panelists as well. In addition to leadership, networking is still very important in this digital world. So make sure that, you're staying connected with everyone that you meet online as well. So before I pass the mic over to our moderator, Kate Holden, I want to remind everyone that if you have a question, you can go to the middle of the screen that says Q&A. And so be sure to chat your question into that box as well. That's so that we can stay organized and we don't have to filter through the chat as well. So we'll have about 30 minutes of our predetermined questions, and then for the last 15-20 minutes or so of the session, we'll be able to answer your questions as well. So again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm gonna close my speaker view and pass it over to Kate now. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and hello and welcome everyone, wherever you're calling or dialing from. We're delighted that you're able to join us today. The subject of this discussion is leadership from entry level to C-suite. So I'm really thrilled to be facilitating the conversation today. As Elizabeth said, I'm Kate Holden. I'm the Chief Strategy and Development Officer at SThree. I spent most of my career working across technology, media, and more recently staffing, and really specialize around sort of growth and digital transformation, and really building global virtual teams, high-performing teams to deliver the best possible results. At SThree, I'm responsible for the development of our group strategy, including corporate development, group marketing, and the execution of some of our big investments around strategic initiatives. So I'd now like to welcome our panelists and ask them to introduce themselves before we get started. So perhaps we start with you, Jennifer.
Great. Well, it's so good to be with you guys today. I wish we could see all of your faces. As Kate said, my name's Jennifer McKeehan. I actually just made a career change. So I spent my first 16 years at Home Depot doing a variety of operations and supply chain work, but really grew my career there across a lot of functions and a lot of different roles. So it'll be fun to talk about that today. and then recently transitioned to Peloton as a senior vice president for their integrated supply chain. So happy to be with you guys today and to chat more.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And perhaps I'll now invite Kristina to introduce herself.
Yeah, hey everybody, Kristina Gustafson. I am Director of Business Operations for Charter Communications Spectrum Enterprise. We're responsible for supporting the end users on all of our business critical applications to support activation of services for some of the country's largest customers of Charter. I am a proud member of the WICT Midwest chapter and I'm a huge supporter of Breaking the Glass. I love this conversation because in my 17 years in the industry or more, maybe at this point, I started out as a business analyst. I worked at a help desk and I kind of look at where I am today and the journey. And it's been a really exciting ride and happy to talk with everyone today about, some tips that everyone else can use in your journey as well.
That's great. Thank you, Kristina. And last but not least, Mona.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kate. So Mona Soni, I'm Vice President of Engineering at Dow Jones. If you're closely monitoring the election results today, maybe WSJ is the site that you're at. So my teams, I head up shared services and platform teams at Dow Jones who provide all of market data, content, and various other services to sites like WSJ, Barron's, and MarketWatch. And there are other platform teams that are focused on a professional side of business. I'm also the founder of our Women in Tech initiative at Dow Jones. And as Kristina mentioned, I'm also a huge proponent of women, and especially in tech where we do not have many women, then how do you promote, encourage? So this topic that we're discussing today is very near and dear to my heart, that how do we bring in more leadership in their journey towards C-suite, and how do we help and support them? So great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mona and Kristina and Jen. It's wonderful to have you all join us today. So as I said, our subject is leadership from entry level to C-suite. And I guess when I think about leadership and female leadership in particular, it attracts so much research, so much debate. We could easily fill in a whole day discussing this, but in the hour that we have, I thought it might be useful to focus around three areas. Female leadership, can anyone really be a leader? And if so, how do you even start? Second area, when we think about leaders, all sorts of different names come to our heads, and perhaps be really good to explore, well, what is it that makes a great leader? What is it that's memorable? What is it that inspires us or makes us want to follow them, work with them, or be like them? And of course, when we think about some of the incredible events that we are experiencing, we are living through a global pandemic, the first for all of us in our generation, not to mention, of course, the election that the United States is going through right now, which impact us as individuals and as professionals. So explore a little bit sort of the leadership that we are seeing and how is that evolving during the global pandemic. So let's start with talking about glass ceiling. This is an event hosted by Breaking the Glass. So if we think about, the glass ceiling is still an invincible barrier, preventing women from their next leadership opportunity. Quite often we see that, we read about that. What might be some of the examples from your career that you can share with our audience today, where you're able to put yourself forward for a new opportunity, and in doing so, what did you learn from that? Could we perhaps start with you, Mona?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So I think that is a very fundamental question, Kate. And all in our careers, we have experienced that at some level, and I'll share this in a bit, that as we go further up and up in our career, I believe the glass ceiling starts becoming thicker and thicker. So it starts getting difficult to break that. But it is a challenge because I have seen people do not see women as natural leaders. We are not their go-to options when they look at like, okay, I have a position, who is the best candidate? Often for, at least for men, women are not the go-to candidates. But I have seen where it has worked is like women do encourage and promote other women in their leadership role. So it's a vicious cycle. We need more women in the leader so that they can bring more women up with them in the leadership position. And sharing an example in terms of like my recent promotion, that how like becoming a vice president. So I was constantly working with my manager that like, what do I need to do to become a VP? And that's a question that many of us ask at whatever role we are. And often there are not that direct answers that we can like, okay, you do this X, Y, and Z and you'll get to the next level. So and in absence of that, it becomes difficult that how do you go about exploring and like, okay, if you give me that these are the gaps or these are the areas I need to improve upon, it becomes slightly easier. But that is something, especially when people have unconscious bias, they are not able to really pinpoint where the problem is. And that's when like having and we can talk more about this further, having a mentor, a sponsor, having a circle of network that can help you with anecdote and their own examples and help you walk you through that journey has been a huge support, at least for me in last few years.
Great, thank you. So the glass is getting thicker. We need mentors, we need sponsors, and that confidence of asking the question, how do I become a VP? So great start, thank you. Kristina, anything you can add from your experiences?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think when I think of the glass ceiling, I'm thinking about just what is keeping me back, you know, from my career, maybe personal to me. And I think it was some of the characteristics that a lot of women have is that I worked really, really hard. You know, I'm like, hey, I work till 10 o'clock every night. I do a ton of work, right? But my boss said, but nobody sees it like I see your work. But broader outside of our group, like nobody's has the visibility to all the good stuff that you're doing. Like you have to market yourself more. You have to promote yourself. So again, with the sponsors and the mentors. So I kind of had like a blind spot. I just felt like I'm going to go in and do my job really, really well. But then there's like, as you go higher up, right, there's more of the politics that you need to consider. There's more of the relationship building, working outside of your group, like working outside of your comfort zone. And I think that some of those characteristics are not necessarily inherent to women. We tend to stick in our swim lane and do our work and hope that someday someone will recognize us, you know, when the opportunities is coming up and maybe not even proactively going after opportunities. So like recently I had a new boss in the past couple of months and I said, you know, he said, what are your career goals? And in the past I would have just said, well, you know, let's play it by ear. If I do a really good job, you kind of let me know what you think. But this time, like I took a different approach. It was like, no, I would like to be, you know, this title in this year. And let's put a plan together on how I can get there. And it's worked out really, really well because on a weekly basis, you know, we go into our status meetings and we say, how are we aligning to kind of the plan that we laid out to get you to the next level? So I think you have to be a little uncomfortable and ask for things and get out of your comfort zone. And if you can do those things, then I think, you know, the glass ceiling is, you know, disappears, you know, the opportunities are unlimited for you.
Thank you. It's interesting, isn't it? Because you said, you know, you either stay in your swimming lane and if you're lucky, maybe somebody taps you on the shoulder and offers you something, or you actually take a little bit more charge of your career and you say, you know what, I have a goal. And if I could just communicate and share that goal, you know, actually probably somebody would be incredibly interested and delighted to have somebody who's offering to take on a new responsibility. So that's really great advice. Now, I'm conscious that a lot of our audience is women. Our panelists are all women, and guess what? You know, women have babies. I know that our panelists do, and Mona, I know you're expecting your third baby as well, which is wonderful. I wish you the very best. But, what happens, when women who work suddenly go away to have the baby, they're on maternity leave, and then they re-enter the workforce? How easy is it? How do we achieve a balance between, personal and work life? Can we achieve a balance? And perhaps invite, Jen to share her story first.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mona, I think, is on her number 3. So she's going to have a better story than I will. But for a little bit of background, I now have a 2.5 and 4-year-old boys. So I had 2 kids in 2 years at a relatively senior level that, honestly, there weren't a lot of female leaders that had done that. And certainly no one that I had been seen in my time, in the past 5 to 8 years. And so, I would say 2 things. I think one is I thought, what are they going to do without me for 12 weeks? They're going to realize they don't need me. And, I wanted to think that they would need me, but I also, was like, well, I'm going to be gone. And I'll tell you, like, that was a completely unfounded fear. I think the team, we had a great team. I had a great peer group. And so they held the ship together for 12 weeks and life went on, which is a good lesson that we should all be taking our vacations and be taking our times for those mental refills. But at the same time, when I came back, it was a great way for me to, continue to add value and sort of maybe take a little bit of a reset and find a different way to come back and approach things. And, some folks don't have that opportunity to get that. And so I think thinking of that time as a positive to really think how you want to reframe coming back. It's a great reset button. And then second is you're never going, or at least for me, I never felt like there's this perfect balance. I think it's understanding where the trade-offs you're willing to make are and what that looks like. So, some women are breastfeeding or pumping at work, or some people, some women want to make sure they leave every day by 4 o'clock because when you have a baby, they go to sleep at 6. And I think it's finding the 2 or 3 things that matter and being okay with the rest, that you're also giving yourself as probably a spouse and an employee and a mom and a friend and all of those things. And so for me, I decided that it was important that I see my kids from 6 to 8 o'clock every day. And I moved mountains to make sure that happened, and everyone knew that. And that was okay. I set those guardrails. And although at the time it was really intimidating, what I will tell you is that you never realize the people that are watching. And so you doing that probably enables 10, 15, 20 other women from afar. I mean, I saw a woman in an elevator one day and she was like, I noticed you leave at 4:30 sometimes. And I was like, I do. And it's fine. The world's going to go on. And, and I thought, I don't even know this woman. It's kind of creepy. She knows when I'm leaving, but that's okay. And so I think being brave to set your guardrails and figure out how to, work around those guardrails, was good. It's not all pretty and it's really hard and it takes a lot of coffee, but it's worth it, and it gets better and it gets easier.
Love the idea about reframing your return. I think that's a really smart way of thinking about it, and sort of, reconnecting with the business world as indeed, setting some guardrails and having the confidence to do that actually the value that you deliver in the organization isn't measured in the hours in terms of presenteeism in the office, but in many different ways. Really, really good real examples of so many of us, really have that feeling of guilt, isn't it? Children are missing important, moments in their lives, and you also want to be a professional in what we do, and arguably as women, I think we almost feel we have to overachieve and over deliver and be that little bit better than the men, because I always think, people talk about, I'm a working mum, but you don't ever hear about a dad being, I'm a working dad or I'm a working father, do we? It's interesting that we qualify ourselves as working moms. To me, that says I have 2 jobs, but doesn't your partner have 2 jobs? And yet we don't call them the same. Mona, what stories, experiences can you share with us, since you are breaking the glass in more than one way, having a 3rd baby?
But I would definitely call her, I hope, Jennifer, the baby sleeps at 6. So I'll take your advice on that. But so I'll share a story, Kate, and it was, and I'll start by saying this, that it's not easy. It takes, and Jennifer also called out, no matter what, whatever support you have both at work and home, it is still a lot of hard work to, you cannot balance, but to manage both of these things. So I was hired at Dow Jones and I was almost 9 months pregnant. She was born, my first one was born less than a month before I started at Dow Jones. So like, you can imagine like doing a job search while being pregnant. I had so many rejections, like for no reason. People would just like, yeah, no, it didn't work out, because they wouldn't know until I appeared in the office back in the days when we were all able to go out, that they would just say like, no, yeah, we found another candidate, it didn't work. So job search is very, very difficult. Right now it's easy. I think like no one would know if I don't share that I'm pregnant. So at that time, it was such a challenging job, but I'm lucky to find something at Dow Jones and something that I was interested and passionate about. And they gave me full 3 months of leave to after I had the baby. So coming back was difficult, and especially establishing yourself in a new organization where you don't know anyone and you're not clear about your role, you're not comfortable. So it was very difficult in the beginning. And as a new mother, first time mother, like you don't even know how to go through. So there again, I found a support person with other mom who was used to come to use the nursing room. So that was my way, like, okay, I like found her, we became friends, and till date we are friends and we found support in each other. So again, going back to the point that you need support, you need someone who can connect, who you can connect with in a similar situation. And even now, like I'm due, just for the FIF for the group, like I'm due on December 30th, so I'm pretty close. And it is a different kind of pressure with the third one because I'm at a different level. I have very different responsibilities, and there are certain things that you really cannot leave to like, oh, here you take the person or your manager that they can do on my behalf, which was easier, I believe, in the last 2 pregnancies. But this time I am, like, frankly speaking, very, very nervous about that part because we had certain organizational changes on our end. So that, like, I do not have that kind of support. So I'm again now trying to build it among my peers and my teams, that how I can support them to get to the next level. And even at home, I got an early advice by someone that if you're really passionate about your career, seeing a support person, a nanny or a babysitter or someone else, see it as an investment. Don't see it as a cost. Because if you're not investing in your career, at one point you're going to give up if you do not have the right support. So if you're planning to become a mother and you want to continue to work, do think about your support system, whether it be your family or you do invest in a caregiver at the right time to maneuver through those initial difficult times before the baby can actually go to a daycare. So think through your plan and think through your strategy.
So have a plan, have a strategy, have some support that you can identify and connect with. That's just really part of, you know, giving ourselves that time to think, but also build the confidence that it is possible to have a baby. It is possible to have that wonderful experience and build a career. That's really great. And you know, I certainly remember, you know, some of the stories. I have 2 children. Pre-pandemic, I used to travel a lot. I used to work for LexisNexis for 10 years, and so I used to come to the, you know, to the US pretty much, you know, on a very regular basis. But, you know, I tried to keep my children's routine intact by having some kind of support network, but still, you know, also, you know, worked for an organization that allowed me on certain important dates, you know, not to miss, you know, important dates at school. And, you know, it is, of course, possible to not always be present in the office, and even in the days when we didn't have the most sophisticated technology. And I think sort of the organization's culture and policies towards working, you know, women, I think is also important to give us that flexibility and space to demonstrate that we can add value and also, you know, have a family. Let's now turn on to the theme of sort of leadership and what is it that, what different types of leaders exist, what might be the leader that springs to mind when we say, who is it that, when you think about a great leader you worked with, what is it that stands out, about them, and what can you share? So perhaps Kristina, you can kick us off.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the leaders that inspire me the most and have gotten probably the most out of myself and my team are the people that take the time to invest in me, right? So my boss that really sits down and listens to what is important to me, what motivates me, where do I want to go. And I really truly feel like they are supporting me and on my side. And I think it's a hard thing to do because we're so busy. And it's something that I have to remind myself to do on a regular basis with my team, to take the time to do that. Having the one-on-one sessions and coming to those prepared and having conversations in your mind ready. What do you want to get out of those conversations? But I really, really think just having that personal connection, interest, and support from the leaders is what I see, has made the biggest difference.
Yeah. Listening is, sometimes something that some leaders don't think they need to do, because there's sometimes the perception that being a leader is all about having the answer, being the first to speak, being the last to speak, being the person who speaks most of the time in the meetings. So listening is a great skill, and I think it's particularly relevant now when we're not often in the same room, we're using technology. So how do you pick up those nuances? How do you make space? I had a coach once who said to me, Kate, when you ask a question, count to 8 seconds before you move on, because 8 seconds for me is a very long time. And I really try to remind myself not to sort of ask. It's very easy to ask the question and then give the answer, because you filled that void in fewer than sort of a couple of seconds. You think 2 seconds is long enough, go in with an answer. So I really like that. Anyone else, Jen or Mona, you want to jump in?
I'll call out that there are good managers who teach you how to be a good manager and a good leader, and there are at the same time bad ones who tell you or teach you that what not to do as a manager. So I have had share of both, and that has taught me that what kind of leader and manager I want to be. And one thing that specifically with my recent manager who retired, and I absolutely loved working for him, was that the style that you're not you're not treating each person on your team exactly the same way. How do you tailor your approach to what the person needs and what the personality is, and not necessarily the other way, that oh, this is my style and exactly the same way I'm going to treat all my teams. And that's how I also try to do with my team, because every person has different needs, has different personality and different roles. So how do you tailor your mentorship, your guidance, and how do you manage them? It has been my biggest learning from my recent manager that I love working with.
Great, thank you. Jen, anything that springs to mind for you?
I think I so agree with Kristina that leadership starts with listening. And I think that will take you just really far. Kind of to Mona's perspective, comment around just knowing your people, knowing what motivates them, and doing something a little bit different for each. A little bit of effort goes a long way. So I love the listening. I think that will carry through many things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some other characteristics as well that I kind of think about is certainly the listening, being empathetic. I also think, integrity, doing what you said you would do, following through. I think that builds confidence for your teams, and it sets the tone of certain behavior of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and building that sort of high performing team is having also clarity around the goals and what you're trying to achieve, so that people understand what their role is, you know, and what their contribution is. And of course, you know, acknowledging those successes and saying thank you. You know, so many people, you know, are working so hard to, you know, and they don't often, you know, get a mention. You know, it's just perceived where you're getting paid to do a job. You know, what more is there? But actually, you know, sometimes a simple thank you, did a great job, can go a long way and buy you that, you know, performance that goes 110%, 120%, rather than sort of 70 or 80%, because people feel that what they're delivering perhaps is perceived to be quite small, not significant, not strategic, or they don't have the right title and so forth. So it's a fascinating debate, isn't it? And there's so much is written about what makes a great leader. And of course, there's sort of, you know, history that teaches us an awful lot. And it's also not always about being the most extrovert or the loudest and the first to speak, as we just discussed. What about lessons, I guess, that we all have learned, you know? Mona was saying earlier on that sort of tailoring that mentorship and sort of, you know, couching around that individual is one of the biggest lessons, you know, she's had. Any other lessons that we've had, you know, from you, Jen or Kristina?
Sure. I feel like I've had a lot of lessons over time, but I think two of my favorites that were the hardest ones that I learned the most from. One is particularly, you know, I love that this is a kind of women in cable tech group, because I think it is a reminder that the world is actually very small as you're growing your career. You know, there were some of my early days where I really prioritized getting results over getting there together. And inevitably, some of those people that you work with will end up being your boss or your peer or something else later in life, where you thought, when would we ever cross paths again? And like somehow karma does that. And, you know, so I think really being intentional about your brand early and thinking through what you want that brand to be, and remembering that the relationships you build, even if they don't seem relevant now, they might seem relevant later, and being very conscientious of that. That was one. And then the second I would say is, you know, not being afraid to fail. I think some of my best lessons over my career have been from major failures. And usually I never got in trouble for the failure. I only, you know, it was only about how you reacted to that failure and how you recover for you and for the team. And so I think not being afraid to fail, but focusing on how you recover effectively, were great things that over time were really hard, but have made me a much better leader on the path of my career.
Yeah, you stole my answer, your first one. I was going to say the same thing. I think early on in my career, I was so motivated and ambitious. I didn't think enough about the team. I was thinking about how do I stand out and differentiate myself. And looking back on it, there were a lot of situations that could have been handled a lot better. And you're contributing more for your boss and your company when everybody's coming on board with you, right? And it's not just you kind of like leading the charge. So I definitely think that was something early on that I didn't think enough about. And also along the same lines, like thinking about your tone and in the emails and all of the different communication styles that you have throughout the day. Being more thoughtful about wording and emails, especially when you're trying to drive to a decision, or if there is people are not on the same page or not in alignment on something, spending more time on either wording it a certain way or just having a meeting and thinking more about the communication styles of others and what is going to help you get to the end result, that everyone can agree to. That was another one. And I think also just understanding, maybe a little thinking more through about what I wanted to be when I grew up as well. And, kind of, like I said earlier, just kind of thought I'll work hard and things will come my way. And to a degree it did, but I think it's just helpful. And hopefully everyone here today, right, in this women's leadership group is already thinking along those lines, but be thinking about where you want to go, because then you can have more of a deliberate path.
That's great. Really like the notion of consider your brand now and in the future, because you never know when, you know, you will come across those individuals. And, you know, I sort of, you know, recognize the lessons that you've shared. And I just wonder if part of us being so results focused and determined to stand out is also because of that glass ceiling as well. It might just be an unconscious way of having to sort of over deliver and overcompensate, perhaps, that we might not be considered or seen as an equal leader and be offered the same opportunities as the person next door who happens to be a man. So but interesting, I guess, you know, if we're really thoughtful and considerate about our own career, it sounds that we also, you know, is really learning, you know, from those lessons and understanding that results are often delivered through others, and recognizing their contributions actually makes us a better leader. And, you know, often you know, you read about saying you hire people that are actually better than you, and you don't see them as a threat. In fact, you know, they're there to, you know, to work with you as a team. And, you know, learning from failure, I think, is such an uncomfortable concept in its own right, isn't it? Because failure is, well, failure, it's failure. So how can you be a leader and fail? You know, my goodness, that's not something that you do. But to really like the notion, this is not just learning from your mistakes, but it's how you react in the moment. I think Jen, that's what you're saying, that's so important. How you behave in that moment when you realize whatever it is just didn't happen in the way you thought it was going to happen, could really define your brand, I guess, in that moment, and sort of carry you forward. So how you respond to that situation, you know, really interesting. Let's move on, I guess, into the more global situation that we're all facing, this global pandemic that none of us could have ever foreseen. 2020 is really building into the most extraordinary year in so many shapes and sizes and forms. So, you know, obviously we're all finding ourselves working in much more virtual ways. In some areas, this has been a constant. I know at SThree, our offices just haven't actually opened throughout this whole pandemic, you know, for a number of reasons. And yet, you know, we are looking to continue, you know, are working full time, and people are finding new ways to reconnect. So, you know, just interested to hear from all of you, from all three, because I think we're all really impacted by the pandemic. What might be the sort of examples in relation to the leadership, how readjusting our behaviors in this scenario to you know, to get the most out of our teams and ourselves. Start with you, Kristina, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. So we have, just like everyone else, relied a lot on the video calls for everything, you know, nowadays. And in the beginning, it was definitely tough to get everyone on the camera. Like, I don't like to be on the camera, you know, it makes me feel self-conscious, but it's kind of like, well, if we're in the office, you're talking anyway. So just think of it like that. And I think that my team, especially, they have a really good time with it. Like, they put funny backgrounds on, you know, like one day somebody's wearing like a wig or something. So it's like, try to have like fun with it and make it a little bit more casual, but really making sure that you're still having those face-to-face conversations, and thinking more about how do you know, what is the right style for a video call. Because, you know, like, I will say that, like, I do see sometimes people join from like their bedrooms with like dirty clothes on the floor and things, which is obviously like really distracting. So just thinking a little bit about, like, let's still try to have like some sort of like designated workspace, and then just try to have fun with it, and keep it as often as you can, the facial, you know, one-on-one conversations. And also, I know a lot of people do like kind of the virtual happy hour type of things. Like, I know my team is talking about doing like a holiday thing, and like, how do you make that work with everybody? And it's really, at the end of the day, it's kind of fun to see everybody like in their little squares, and you know, doing like polls and trivia questions and things. So I think it's been actually a good way to be more creative with the team, but just keeping those things going for sure has helped us stay in touch a lot.
Great. What about you, Mona?
First thing I would say, like, we wouldn't have been able to get together as this group if it were not for pandemic, because like we would have wanted panelists who were part of the same city. So that's a plus side of this whole thing. But I would say, like, being part of tech teams, we were used to of working remotely, and because we have teams distributed across the globe. But this was a different experience. And as leaders, it was challenging at different level, because like every person on your team is in a different boat. They had different challenges. Some who had young kids, they had different challenges. School stopped or virtual learning. Some who had teenage kids had a very different problem to work with. Like emotionally, the kids have been through a lot this time. And with just the risk of that someone getting sick, and we had few people who had their elderly parents affected by this, who passed away. So mentally and emotionally, it was a huge drain on people at different level. And I shared with the panelists earlier, like most of my team is in Minneapolis, and with the racial unrest that happened there, it was another thing that was thrown in the whole thing. And it hasn't stopped. It's not that like no one would, I don't think any one of us would see that like, okay, we know how to handle this, because every day there is a new challenge. Every time we feel like, oh my, this might be over in 3 months and 6 months, and the timeline keeps shifting. And now with the pandemic fatigues sitting in, holidays coming, with elections and other changes going around, you can never say that like you know how to handle this. So it's a constant evolution for us as a leaders, that how do you emotionally recognize the needs of your team, be empathetic, but at the same time, how do you keep them motivated to deliver on the work that they're expected to, because the business needs to keep going. You cannot stop that, otherwise we'll all lose jobs. So how do you keep the balance of putting the right amount of pressure with the right support has been a constant learning for me. And I'll say, like, we are still figuring out here.
Great.
Yeah. You know, I think Kate had said something earlier, and Mona just said it. I think one of the unique silver linings about this is that it has really brought empathy to the forefront of teams and leaders. To, you know, before we've all had leaders who wouldn't have even known like what our family situation is or what we like to do on the weekends. But like now it's so much more personal that in some ways I think people feel more invested from their leader remotely than you might have been like when we were all just kind of running 100 miles an hour in the office. So I think that has been this interesting silver lining. And then, you know, the other thing I think is this is a unique time to take advantage of. To, you know, Mona mentioned, like, we didn't all have to be in the same city and we could still come today. Like, this is the time where it's so easy to grab 20 minutes of a coffee chat with someone that you would have never otherwise come across, or, you know, think differently about your current role or your next role or your next company. And so I think, like, because it is unique, think of what are the great things you can do because we're in this situation. I just went through a job search. I had a lot of interviews. I never got on a plane. And I met, you know, like, what a crazy idea. Like, that's so interesting. And so I think, you know, in addition to just sort of self-care and self-maintenance, like, what are the things that you can make good out of the situation we have? Because there are some unique opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise gotten to take advantage of.
Yeah, no, there's really good stories. Thank you for sharing that. And you're absolutely right. You know, we are inviting each other into our homes, you know, in a way that we just wouldn't have done before. And so that empathy and that willingness to be more patient, willingness to learn more about someone's, you know, situation. What did they do at the weekend? What about the weather? You know, what's happening in their city and town? It's now become part of the dialogue in a way that just wouldn't have happened before. So, you know, at SThree, we started in the early days because we thought this is only going to last a month, maybe, I don't know, 3-4 weeks. So somebody in my team said, why don't we just do a quick check-in for 15 minutes just to check how each other is, you know, is doing and how they're feeling. And of course, as each week went on and on, I sort of checked in a couple of times and people said, no, we want to keep these 15-minute check-ins. We enjoy them. And as you said, we are connecting more frequently than we would ever have done, because we would have been thinking, oh, we're in different offices and locations. Let's figure out an offsite. It's going to be in a few months' time. And now we still do that because, and sometimes we just don't talk about business. It's, you know, it's a virtual coffee and we just can talk about anything, sport, the elections, you know, what we did at the weekend. And people enjoy just having that gathering, that personal time, you know, with colleagues. So I think, you know, I'd like to think that as difficult as it is bringing more of the best of us in and best of humanity, if you like, in the workspace than perhaps you know, not. So staying positive, and let's hope, of course, that vaccine and therapeutics are on their way nonetheless, but make the most of it. I think that's what we're all saying. I'm conscious that we've got some questions coming in from our audience that it probably be remiss of me not to sort of try and get to those. So we have a question around, this was earlier in the conversation around having a mentor or a sponsor, and Dake Elmi is saying, well, that's easier said than done. I have been looking for a circle, a sponsor and a mentor for years, and successfully. I feel shut out. So what more can we say to this question of how can somebody go about finding that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I mean, especially speaking about, you know, WICT organization, professional organization, they have mentoring programs, right? So if you're not a member of WICT, you're not in the telecommunications industry, find another professional organization. A lot of them, you know, have them out there, or just Google mentoring circle. There's a lot of different options out there. And also I will say, when you pursue a mentor, know what you want to get out of it in advance, because otherwise, you know, it's just not going to be a maximum experience for you. Like the first time I had a mentor, I was kind of like, well, everybody says you should have a mentor, so I'm just going to get a mentor. And, you know, like we met once and she was asking these really hard questions I hadn't really thought about, and it kind of fizzled out. And looking back on it, I was bummed because she was really a phenomenal person. And then later on in my career, I spent more time kind of researching and preparing like how to be a good mentee and understanding what you want to get out of it. I had much more valuable relationships with my mentor. So there's a ton of different resources. Look for professional organizations and, you know, come prepared with what you want to get.
Good. Anything else from anyone else on how you go about finding a mentor? You know, I think for me, it's also the fact that we can be more virtual now probably presents more opportunities as well. I know that it might just feel perhaps a little clunky at the beginning because, you know, you haven't met that person in person, but actually, you know, I can tell you, I'm new to, you know, my current role as well, Jen, just a little over a year. So I built pretty much a brand new team because it's a brand new sort of function. And so 3/4 of my team are all what you call COVID joiners, because they were interviewed and recruited entirely virtually. They've never set foot in the office. They've never met most of us in person. And yet we've created a great bond and there's great, you know, collaboration and support. So I wouldn't shy away from the fact that actually there's probably more opportunities now to connect with individuals, because as we said, finding half an hour to have a conversation, because you're not, you know, rushing from airport and location to location, actually may find that there's more opportunities there. Okay, we have another question from Singjaya. Having the time to manage both the work and the networking becomes a challenge. How do you manage that?
I can hop in because I just did that. And I would tell you, I felt the exact same thing at my old job. I said, I am like busting my tail to work. Like I can't keep a job, find a job and have kids. Like this is not, you know, a equation that's going to work. And so I think over time, there are ways to do it smarter, not harder. And there are ways to you know, piecemeal it out so it feels consumable. So I would say one, and what a phenomenal question, because one, like you want to be networking before you're ready for your next job. If you wait until you want the next job, it is too late and it is painful and feels arduous. So I would say, like, you should always be doing it. And once you're in maintenance mode, it's so much easier. So like I had a really intentional strategy around how do I want to build my network? Like if I started at nothing, you know, Kristina's point, like joining a professional organization, like, and women want to help women. Like I was always afraid to call and ask for help. And like my lesson was everybody wants to help. Like all the people on this call are super busy and we just want to help. And so don't be afraid to ask. Build your network, make your network. But then once you are maintaining your network, it's so much easier. So I do things like now I have my spreadsheet of friends that I made over time, and I email 5 people a week and check in. And so then it's not like this rush of work I feel like I need to be prepared for. It's like I'm just kind of keeping tabs on folks. And I think, you know, think of what your things are. For some people, it's the Christmas card list. Like, and I know that sounds silly, but like sending a Christmas card every year, it's super easy. And then people remember you. Or like have one LinkedIn post every other Monday. Like I have a reminder on my calendar. Every 2 weeks, I want to post on LinkedIn so people remember to see my name. Like there are little easy things and they're different for everyone. But I think finding a way to structure it so you feel like I did what I said I was going to do, check box, I'm going back to my job, was helpful for me. Otherwise, I'd always feel like there's always more networking I should be doing and there's always more work I should be doing. And I feel like I'm not doing any of them effectively. That was mine.
No, yeah, that's excellent advice. And I think the key there is that it doesn't feel like you do it and then you stop for a very long time, and then suddenly at the point where you maybe need to move on, you start reconnecting and maybe finding interesting articles that you think somebody might be interested to see, something in their industry or just something that you think would be, you know, of interest for them to read. So you maintain it, and you know, it's great that, you know, it sounds like you're really well organized, Jen, and you got your alerts coming out, you know, blog on LinkedIn, you know, send my 5. Yes, that's fantastic. I can't say I'm quite as well organized as you. It's probably a little bit more haphazard, but I think the important thing is to go for it. And I really think, you know, people actually like to be asked for their advice. So asking for help, it's not a failure. It's the start of a conversation. And I've certainly, you know, reached out on many occasions to seek advice. And you know what? Never has anyone said, no, I don't want to give it, or I don't have time. People are always very gracious and very, very willing to share their experiences. So go for it. Now we've got a really, sorry.
One thing I would add to that is like, you should see networking as a different than work, because if you want to grow, if you want to become a leader, it's part of your work, and you should build it into your work profile and have that networking both internally and externally, like in your organization and even outside. So start looking at it as like it is work and you need to do it. It's not something that you're doing extra.
Yeah. We have a really interesting next question. How do you manage politics as you rise up? And sometimes a big challenge when you are a newcomer and trying to create your own path forward.
I'm happy to take that. I'm like maneuvering and learning a lot about this space very recently. So being an introvert person, the politics doesn't come naturally. So over the years, I have had to force myself into it, and also seeing it as something positive and not a very negative, dirty word, because at the end, it's about how do you manage expectations, how do you manage your commitment, and help people understand the context and the background where you're coming from, is where what people often really translate into politics. It can get in the wrong way and become ugly and bad. But at some level of this kind of organizational communication, that I call it, instead of calling it politics, helps for you to help people understand what you're working and where you're coming from. And trust me, like as you go further and further in your career, you have to do more and more. The percentage of time you spend doing these things become greater and greater. And I have been told by some of my mentors who are like at an executive level that you have to do more as you go further, because you have to manage communications and expectations across the organization, or maybe different organizations with your clients. So see it as a positive thing instead of a dirty, bad word, and how it can help you maneuver some of the challenges and the growth of your career is a shift in attitude that has helped me a lot to doing it in an effective way.
Yeah, and I will say that navigating politics is all about your relationships with your colleagues and your boss, managing up and managing down, right? So that goes back to the networking and building those relationships and those connections, because that's when you're most influential, when you have those people behind you. And I think that was another lesson I probably learned in my career is I kind of put myself on the line a few times instead of going to my boss, because I either wanted to show that I could do it on my own without their help. But I remember one of my bosses said, don't take a risk on yourself. That is what I'm here to protect you. If you're ever in a situation where you feel like, it could go sideways or you're not in alignment with someone, get support from your boss first. Or another thing is, who are the people that you think might disagree with you in a meeting, and have a small meeting with them first to explain your point of view before you go into a big meeting and it's potentially going to be in a big audience. You want to get those people on your side first and at least explain your point of view, so you can hopefully go into a bigger call and have those people. So again, I do think it goes to that time building relationships and connections.
Great, thank you. Jen, anything from you on this subject of politics in the office?
I think Kristina hit it spot on of always ask for help, take a buddy, like be a little strategic about it, and having those relationships will smooth that out, but always leading with kindness and staying out of the water cooler chat makes a big difference. And it's tempting. It's very tempting, but stay out of it.
Really good advice. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I am trying to check if we've got any more questions coming up, but hopefully that's the last one I think we've had. What I might do is just sort of try and do a bit of a summary, because I think we've touched on quite a lot of topics today, and we talked at the beginning around how do you start, and I think we talked about taking charge, having the confidence to actually have a bit of a plan and put ourselves out there, get ourselves out of that swimming lane where we feel most comfortable about, identifying and working with a mentor, being clear about the goals, what are we trying to achieve, getting that advice. We talked quite a bit about having babies, enjoying that experience, and then thinking about reframing our return, making sure we're building some support around us in those early days when it's so important. We're just coming to terms with going back to the office, but also again having the confidence, isn't it, about building some, introducing some guardrails that it's okay to leave at 4:30. The business is not going to fall off a cliff, and what, we are adding value, and it's absolutely okay to go at 4:30. We talked about different types of leadership, and the things that I think we all really are inspired by is firstly having that listening, that empathy, that willingness to support, hire people that are better than ourselves, that can really help us drive to the results. And then we talked about, think about your career at the entry point level. You may not know who you're going to meet again years later, whose initial early relationship with you may or may not have been great. But if you build great relationships at the start of your relationship, it might be 2, 3, 5, or 10 years later, you may come across them as peers or as your boss or as your subordinate, you don't know, but they may remember that great relationship, you'll remember that great relationship, and you can move forwards that way. And we talked about, failures actually is part of becoming a better leader. We learn more from failures than we learn from thinking that everything we do is success, but also how we react in the moment, how we react towards that failure, what we learn from that. And we talked about the pandemic. Whilst it's pretty difficult and challenging, and certainly the situation in the US, Minneapolis and various other events that have happen on top of that have layered that complexity, but actually it's brought something better in terms of the human aspect, that empathy, that personal approach that perhaps, you know, we don't get enough of when we're working in, you know, in the office. And networking, keep it up, be regular, set up those alerts and keep going. So I know it's sort of, I don't know where the hour is gone, but I guess Elizabeth is coming to pop up to sort of close us off.
Yes, again, yeah, the hour went by so quickly. Thank you again, Kate, Jennifer, Kristina, Mona, for joining us this afternoon. You're all incredible, busy women. We really appreciate your time. Everyone, I just dropped a link for an attendee survey. So if you could take that and let us know what we did great and what you'd like to see in the future, that would be appreciated. And yeah, everyone have a great day. We will send out a recording as well so that you can share all this wonderful advice with your other coworkers so that we can all be wonderful leaders in our organization. So thank you again, and we'll do the little virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.